On the evening of November 24, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, a man walked into Portland International Airport, dressed in a black suit, a white shirt, and a thin black tie. Carrying only a briefcase and giving his name as Dan Cooper, he purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. He appeared calm, polite, ordinary, but what he would do next would etch his name into American criminal folklore forever. Just minutes after takeoff, he passed a note to a flight attendant. What she thought was a flirtatious advance turned into something far more chilling. The note read, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." This was no ordinary crime. It was the only unsolved case of air piracy in American aviation history. The man who hijacked a plane collected $200,000 in ransom and then parachuted into the night, never to be seen again. His name, D.B. Cooper. Or at least, that's the name the world gave him. This is the full story of America's most infamous hijacker. A case of daring, deception, and a mystery that remains unsolved over 5 decades later. Flight 305 was a short 30-minute hop from Portland to Seattle. But for the 36 passengers and 6 crew members on board that Boeing 727, it would become a flight into the pages of history. D.B. Cooper sat in seat 18C. He ordered a bourbon and soda and lit a cigarette, common for the time. Moments later, he passed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Initially ignoring it, she assumed it was another businessman's attempt at flirtation. But he leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Opening his briefcase, he revealed red sticks, wires, and a battery, what appeared to be a crude yet convincing explosive device. Cooper dictated his demands calmly. $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane for a getaway. What followed was an unprecedented display of calm by both the hijacker and the authorities. No panic, no bloodshed. The plane circled Seattle for nearly 2 hours while the ransom was assembled. The FBI complied. At 5:39 p.m., the plane landed in Seattle. Passengers were released in exchange for the cash and parachutes, unknowing they had just shared a cabin with a soon-to-be legend. But Cooper stayed behind with a skeleton crew and a plan that would stun the nation. With only the flight crew on board, Cooper issued new instructions. Fly south, low altitude, gear down, cabin depressurized. The destination, Mexico City, he claimed, but they would never make it that far, not because of fuel, but because of fate. At around 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of southwestern Washington, the rear stairway of the 727 was lowered. The crew felt the cabin pressure shift. A light blinked in the cockpit, and D.B. Cooper jumped. Vanished into the ink-black night, into a storm over treacherous terrain, with 21 pounds of cash strapped to his body and only a parachute separating him from certain death. The plane landed safely in Reno, Nevada, but Cooper was gone. No trace, no parachute, no body. Just legend. When the wheels of Flight 305 touched down in Reno, Nevada at 10:15 p.m., the FBI was waiting. They stormed the aircraft, guns drawn, adrenaline high, but there was no resistance. There was no D.B. Cooper. Only the flight crew remained, shaken, confused, but unharmed. The rear staircase was still partially deployed. The cabin was cold, open to the night air. The bag of cash was gone. So was the man in the black suit. In the hours that followed, the FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in U.S. history. Every passenger on the flight was interrogated. Sketch artists worked feverishly with crew members to produce a composite portrait. A white male, mid-40s, 510 to 6 feet tall, 170-180 pounds. He spoke with no accent. He was calm, intelligent, and oddly polite. The description was vague. The name he used, Dan Cooper, was a dead end. It wasn't until a miscommunication with the press that he was forever immortalized as D.B. Cooper. The FBI believed Cooper had jumped between 8:00 and 8:15 p.m., somewhere over the dark, rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, near the Lewis River and the densely wooded Mount St. Helens region. But finding the exact spot was like searching for a shadow in a forest. Armed with maps, dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of searchers, agents combed the area. Days passed, then weeks. But there was no trace, no parachute, no body, no money. It was as if he had vanished into the trees and into legend. The media exploded with coverage. The mysterious skyjacker captured the imagination of a nation already disillusioned by war, corruption, and cultural upheaval. Americans weren't sure whether to fear him or admire him. He hadn't killed anyone. He hadn't harmed a soul. He had executed a daring, cinematic heist and disappeared without a trace. To many, he wasn't a criminal. He was a folk hero. But for the FBI, the manhunt was just beginning. Over the coming weeks, hundreds of leads poured in. Former paratroopers, ex-cons, suspicious loners, men with debt, men with motives, all were investigated. None were Cooper. No solid suspects, no parachute, no money, just trees, silence, and questions. How could a man jump from a commercial airliner in the middle of a stormy night and simply vanish? It was a name that launched a legend. Dan Cooper. That's what the man wrote on his boarding pass. That's what he told the flight crew. But it wasn't his real name. It was a disguise, one of the few deliberate breadcrumbs he left behind. But here's where things get strange. Dan Cooper wasn't just a name. It was also the title of a Franco-Belgian comic book series, popular in French-speaking Europe during the 1950s and 60s. The comics followed a fictional Canadian Air Force pilot who frequently parachuted out of planes, often escaping danger in dramatic fashion. In one issue, Dan Cooper even jumps from a plane with a briefcase in hand. Coincidence? Perhaps. But if the hijacker took his alias from this obscure comic, it suggests something else, that he was familiar with European pop culture, specifically French-language media. Was Cooper Canadian, European? Did he speak French? Had he served in a foreign military? No one knows, but the comic book clue adds another layer to the puzzle, not just about who Cooper was, but about how carefully he constructed his identity. This wasn't a name pulled at random. It was a mask, a story, a performance. And whoever he was, he played it perfectly. For years, nothing was recovered until 1980. On the banks of the Columbia River, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand when he discovered something extraordinary. 3 bundles of cash, rotting, discolored, but unmistakably wrapped in rubber bands. Serial numbers matched the ransom money. It was $5,800. But how did it get there, and where was the rest? The money's location, 20 miles from the suspected drop zone, raised new questions. Had Cooper landed safely and buried the money? Did the river wash it downstream? The find sparked renewed interest but led nowhere. The mystery only grew. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI made a shocking announcement. The case of D.B. Cooper was being closed. Citing lack of new evidence, the Bureau officially ended one of its longest-running manhunts. They released files to the public. Online sleuths pored over every detail. Amateur investigators took up the cause, hoping to crack the code. But the FBI's decision marked an end, at least officially. Yet for the world, the legend of D.B. Cooper was only beginning. Did Cooper survive? If he died, why was no body ever found? If he lived, where did he go? Who was he? Some believe he was a disgruntled veteran. Others say he was a Northwest employee who knew the 727's unique rear stairway, something few civilians would know. Others argue it was masked as heroism, a final act of rebellion. There are even theories that Cooper was a CIA operative, or a decoy for a deeper operation. Stranger still, some theorists suggest the money found in 1980 was a deliberate plant to mislead investigators. As years passed, the mystery transcended crime. It became folklore. D.B. Cooper was now a symbol of rebellion, of escape, of possibility. D.B. Cooper's mystique seeped into movies, books, and television. He's been portrayed as an anti-hero, a gentleman thief, and even a time traveler in shows like Loki and Prison Break. Bars are named after him. An annual CooperCon is held in Washington state. People dress as him for Halloween. In a world hungry for unsolved mysteries, Cooper is king. His story remains the perfect crime. No blood, no victims, no justice. Just a man who vanished into thin air and into legend. More than 5 decades later, the world still asks, who was D.B. Cooper? How did he pull it off? And most haunting of all, what happened after he jumped? Did he watch the news that night from a motel room, smiling over a cheap drink? Did he die cold and alone, buried under moss and snow? Or is he still alive today, an old man, somewhere quiet, smiling at the world that still wonders? In the end, the mystery of D.B. Cooper endures, because it challenges our sense of what's possible. One man, one act, and one leap into darkness forever changed American history. We may never know the truth, but maybe that's why we're still obsessed. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we can't solve. This was the mystery of D.B. Cooper.